Hi guys, welcome back. This video is basically about understanding the AS paper pattern and the marking pattern as well. So let's get started. Now, what we already know is that the paper will be of 60 marks. It is now changed to 60 marks from 40 marks as before. And now the time has also been increased to 2 hours, right? It comprises of 3 sections. The case study, which is a compulsory 20-mark question. Section B, 20 marks. There'll be 2 questions. We need to attempt 1. And section C will be from macro. And section B, by the way, will be of micro. Section C will be macro, 20 marks. 2 questions, we need to attempt 1 question. Okay, now guys, first thing that you need to understand, which is very crucial, and I would definitely suggest you all to make sure that you watch the video till the end, is that the marking in your A level exam is based on how well or how successfully the students basically fulfill the assessment objectives. It is not based on how much you write, it's based on how well you write. In other words, I could say it's not about what you write, it's about how you write that, right? And we'll see what assessment objectives are later on in the video as well. And I probably am planning a series of multiple videos regarding your marking and paper patterns and, assessment objectives as well. So, and you need to understand that these assessment objectives basically carry different weightages and they carry different marks. For example, let's say that in a 6-mark case study question, because the last 2 questions in a case study will be for 6 marks, and the last 2 parts of the question will be of 6 marks in the case study, and they also carry different weightages in section B and C for 8 and 12 marker essay questions as well. And out of so there are 3 assessment objectives in total that you need to be aware of as students. It is very crucial for you that you cannot attempt a paper before you know what the assessment objectives are, because the assessment objectives are basically the basis or the criteria on which the examiner will mark you, and it is also the criteria for you guys as students to know on how and what to write and how to attempt the paper as well, because the paper attempt or what you write is based on the content is based on, it revolves around, the writing style revolves around the assessment objectives, right? So you need to be aware of them. Very important. This is the most important thing. And the marks, guys, are awarded in the essays on how well these assessment objectives are satisfied, right? So remember, again, I'm going to repeat what I just said, that marks are not awarded on the basis of how much you are writing. It is not that the more you write, the more marks you get. Remember that, right? And also you need to remember that marking is basically a normative judgment by the examiner. And I'll prove that to you later on in my coming videos. I'll make sure that I post them before the exam, that marking is a normative judgment by the examiner, which is based on as in the examiner's best judgment, based on the quality of the answer, and also based on how well all the assessment objectives have been satisfied by the student, right? There are 3 assessment objectives that you guys need to be aware of. That is assessment objective 1, which is knowledge and understanding, assessment objective 2, analysis, and assessment objective 3, evaluation. Now, in this video, I'm not going to be explaining in detail what these assessment objectives are. You need to hang on till and wait till my next video comes out, where I will be explaining in detail regarding that. But now for this video, I'll just, sort of give you a breakup about how the questions are marked according to the assessment objectives. So for example, so as far as the assessment objective is concerned, you need to know that for the last 2 questions of the case study, which will be for 6 marks, you need to know what sort of assessment objectives are being tested there. So 4 marks out of the 6 marks case study question, the last 2 ones, 4 marks will be for analysis and the last 2 marks will be for evaluation. So out of 6, 4 marks for assessment objective 2, which is analysis, and 2 marks for evaluation, right? Similarly, in the 8-mark essay questions in section B and in section C, that is your essays, basically up to 3 marks are reserved for assessment objective 1, that is knowledge and understanding of the topic, of the question, of what the narrative in the question is. 3 marks for assessment objective 2, which is analysis, and up to 2 marks, that is up to maximum of 2 marks for assessment objective 3, that is evaluation. And for the 12-mark essay question, 4 marks are reserved for assessment objective 1. That is a maximum of 4 marks if you have successfully satisfied. According to the examiner, you have successfully satisfied, not according to you, but according to the examiner, you have successfully satisfied the assessment objective 1. That is, you have provided sufficient knowledge and understanding of the product topic that is being asked in the question, or the narrative in the question. Then 4 marks are for assessment objective 2, that is analysis. Later on, like I said, not in this video, in my coming videos, what is analysis, how to analyze, all of that will be, I'll make sure that post it inshallah before the exam on 5th. The 4 marks are also reserved for assessment objective 3, that is evaluation. So you need to know the breakup. That is, so for example, if you have done everything right in the exam and you made all the diagrams, you gave all the examples, and you're like, you come out of the exam room saying that you have done your best, and according to you have done your best, but you have failed to evaluate. So even if you have written a 2 or a 3 page answer, but that answer is without any evaluation, so the maximum that you will get is, out of 12 you'll only get 8 because you haven't really evaluated in the exam, right? And same goes for 8-mark questions as well. Evaluation is very important. Also remember, guys, that conclusions are very important for 8 and 12-mark questions. Conclusions can be a conclusion depending upon what the question is. The conclusion will form or revolve according to what the question or the narrative in the question is. We'll see in the coming videos how to conclude as well. Also remember that conclusions could also be in the form of a judgment as well, depending upon the nature of the question. And we'll see, I've posted a couple of questions in this for this video as well, so just hang on till I move forward. Also, one more important thing that you need to see, that in 6 marks case study question, there is no assessment objective. They are not testing your knowledge and understanding. So even for 6 marks question, you don't need to sort of provide the background knowledge of, for example, if it's a 6-mark question that asks you about the consequences of inflation, you don't need to define what inflation is. You need to tell the types of inflation. You don't need to provide them knowledge on what inflation is all about. You just need to directly start your case study by saying that the consequences could be good and bad, and the bad consequences are as follows, while the good consequences. So that's how you need to attempt the case study, because you need to finish the paper on time as well. So there's no need to write an opening paragraph or an introduction paragraph for 6 marks case study questions. Remember that very carefully. Why? And the simple reason is because there's no mark which is kept for assessment objective on knowledge and understanding. So for example, I'll try to further explain you using some specimen. By the way, I've solved the specimen paper as well on my YouTube a couple of days back. So for example, if you see the 6-mark questions, so 2 mark questions, either it will be 2 and then 6 or it might be 4 6. That depends upon what the examiner's choice is. So assess the likely macroeconomic effects of the pressure on the exchange rate of the Vietnamese dong arising from Vietnamese increased exports. So for example, for a question like this, you don't need to sort of explain what an appreciation of the as in why would the exchange rate appreciate, or what an appreciation of an exchange rate is, or provide them with knowledge of why would it appreciate. Although in my video I did that, but the purpose of my video was not to just answer the question. The purpose was to explain the concept as well, and that is the only reason why I did that. And I gave the disclaimer as well that I wanted to take the opportunity to explain the concepts as well. Okay, so as far as for example, so for a case study question, again 4 marks reserved for analysis, which would revolve around how would what would be the impact of increased exports on the currency appreciation, and how would that affect other macroeconomic variables. And then it would be evaluation would be for 2 marks, right? And then there should be an overall conclusion as to whether the overall impact, is it favorable, negative, positive, negative, favorable, unfavorable. And maybe you could say that the overall impact on different macroeconomic variables would depend upon so and so reasons, right? So again, guys, first of all, you need to also understand that as far as evaluation is concerned, evaluation is an umbrella term, and under that term a lot of things come. So it's very difficult for me to explain right now what evaluation is, and then I can't say that evaluation right now means this or evaluation means that. The reason is, evaluation does not only means this, or it does not only means that. Evaluation means multiple things, and multiple things come in under evaluation. We're going to be seeing that in the coming videos as well. But if you look at this question, it says assess the likely effects on the pressure on the exchange rate, on the assess the likely macroeconomic effects because of an appreciation in the exchange rate. That's what the question is asking. So maybe one evaluation could be like, the effects would depend upon the price elasticity of demand for imports and exports, because appreciation, we know that it would be unfavorable for the current account balance, would turn into a current account balance would turn into a deficit, or deficit may rise. But that depends upon the, it depends upon a lot of things. It depends upon, for example, the elasticity of exports and imports. It also depends upon the extent to which the currency has appreciated, how bad or good of how, the extent to which the impact it has on macroeconomic variables, or maybe if the appreciation is, let's say, if the appreciation is reducing your net exports, for example. So if your net exports go down because of an appreciation, because the price of imports go down and then you import more while the exports become expensive, so you export less. So net exports go down and AD goes down because of that. But then simultaneously, components C and I could go up. So the AD could be offset. So these are ways in which you could evaluate the likely effects. Because the question is such, the narrative of the question is that you need to tell the effects of the macroeconomic effects of the appreciation of the exchange rate. But if you're evaluating you're simply evaluating economic theory here. So the economic theory or the narrative is that, appreciation does have an impact on different macroeconomic variables. And if you're telling those impacts in analysis, then in evaluation you need to sort of say that it depends upon in evaluation you could say that whatever you have analyzed above, that whatever narrative that you have analyzed, it depends upon the following. Now, don't think that evaluation simply means that depends upon. It depends upon is not only what evaluation means, right? And similarly, another question was assess whether Vietnam's economic miracle is likely to persist. Again, 4 marks for analysis and then 2 marks for evaluation. And then again, like I said, remember that the last part of evaluation is always a judgment. So you need to give a judgment here. Here, it would be a judgment because it's asking us, because here the narrative is in the form of an opinion, whether this would persist or not. So you need to sort of give an opinion as well. Maybe you could challenge the opinion, you could go for the opinion, you could go against the opinion, or maybe you could give a generalized opinion, right? Or maybe, so for example, whether economic miracle is likely to persist or not, I remember clearly that I gave a conclusion as well over there. You can check that out as well in my specimen video. But if you're saying that whether it would persist, or if you're saying that whether it would not persist, you need to back up reasoning for it. Or if you could say, or if you, for example, say that maybe it's difficult to answer clearly whether the economic miracle will persist or not, this is another way that you could form a judgment. Because it's difficult to sort of answer with certainty that whether the miracle will persist or not. But then if you're saying that, then what is the reasoning or the coherent or the logical reasoning for that, right? So that's a conclusion. Remember that conclusions are sort of either conclusion could wrap up things in the end, or conclusion could be in the judgment form. But whether conclusion should wrap up things in the end or whether it is in the judgment form depends upon the nature of the question or the nature of the narrative in the question. So, for example, another like this basically case study came in Feb March. So like in Feb March case study part D and E, again 4 marks for analysis, 2 marks for evaluation. So for a question like in part D, the conclusion could just wrap up things like saying conclusively, because here the question was assess whether rising inflation rate is caused by demand side or supply side through ADS diagram. So here the conclusion after evaluating, you could conclude by saying conclusively, here both factors, the demand side and the supply side factors, were playing a role in bringing an inflation, because there was both demand side and cost push inflation, right? So here the conclusion in this sort could go in this way. Here there's no here because the narrative in the question is not an opinion. They're not asking your judgment here, right? As in they're asking you to assess whether this would be, but this is not sort of a judgment form of a question. That is, this is more of a like, a conclusively the inflation rate is based on both demand side and supply side factors, although it does give the touch of judgment as well, but it is not the sort of judgments that usually come, the judgment sort of conclusions that usually come or are expected in your exams. And then assess the possible consequences of a rising rate of inflation. Again, 4 marks for analysis, 2 marks for evaluation, and then the conclusion. As in, now here again, the possible consequences of inflation they're asking us, but here they're not asking us to give a sort of a judgment here. They're just asking us to assess the consequences. But we need to identify the narrative here. What is the narrative? The narrative is that yes, inflation does have a consequence on the economy, which could be both positive and negative. And analyzing the narrative would mean that you tell all the positive or the negative consequences in the exam, and then evaluating the narrative would mean that you sort of maybe you say that the positive consequences would depend upon these factors, or the negative consequences would depend upon these factors, right? Or if these factors persist, then inflation would be positive. I mean, inflation could be desirable or undesirable, or maybe like demand pull inflation is more desirable than cost push, which is more undesirable than demand pull. So evaluation, like I said, is an umbrella term which covers a lot of things. Okay. And I've covered this question, by the way, in my solution on Feb March as well. Again, remember that the nature of these questions are such that here you're not expected to provide an opinion. Because this question could also come in the sense that maybe they could say, assess whether cost push inflation is more harmful than demand pull inflation, or discuss the view that, or consider whether demand pull inflation is more harmful than cost push inflation. Now here you need to form a judgment, which is more harmful, right? So the narrative for such questions is that yes, inflation is harmful, demand pull is harmful as well, and because that's what the narrative is establishing, that demand pull is harmful as well and cost push is, but it's asking us that what is more harmful. So analyzing the narrative would mean that you tell when is demand pull inflation harmful, and then when is cost push inflation harmful. That's analysis, assessment objective 2. While evaluating the narrative would mean that if you're saying that demand pull inflation is harmful, then when is it not harmful, and when is cost push inflation not harmful, or the harmfulness. That's one way to evaluate. Another way to evaluate, which you have to use the other way as well, that which I will tell you right now, you would say that the harmfulness of how bad inflation is depends upon these and these and these and these factors. It depends upon the rate of inflation as well, right? It depends upon the current state of the economy. Maybe there's a lot of spare capacity. Maybe aggregate demand was way below full employment. So if there's demand for inflation coming right now, that seems desirable right now, right? Because we already have a lot of spare capacity. So that is evaluation. That is, you're evaluating the narrative when it is not harmful, right? And then and remember, guys, that the last, now a lot of students do have this misconception that if conclusion is evaluation itself. No, conclusion is not evaluation. Evaluation leads to a conclusion. Remember that. Evaluation ultimately leads or ends on a conclusion or a judgment. Okay. Okay, and like I said, in case studies, you don't need to tell about knowledge and understanding. There's no need for, and also, guys, there's no need for introductions and no need to provide basic information on the topic. For case studies, come directly to the point, direct to the point answer, right? And I've sort of given some more examples here. For example, like this section B question that came in specimen for 8 marker, because before you weren't asked to evaluate an 8 marker question, but now 2 marks are given for evaluation. So it says, with the help of a diagram, explain how a production possibility curve can be used to show the concept of opportunity cost. And then it says, and consider whether opportunity cost is likely to remain constant if resources are reallocated from agriculture to industrial. So 3 marks for analysis and 2 marks for evaluation, while 3 marks for knowledge and understanding. So as far as the knowledge and understanding part is concerned, you talk about what the PPC is, and it shows opportunity cost. Maybe explain opportunity cost, and also you talk that opportunity cost could be increasing, decreasing, or constant in a PPC. And then as far as the analysis is concerned, remember that you need to identify the narrative. What's the narrative here? The simple narrative here is that they're asking us that the production possibility curve could be used to show the concept of opportunity cost. So that's the narrative. That's narrative number 1. There's another narrative that is mentioned in the question, and that is that opportunity cost is likely to remain constant if resources are reallocated, which means that opportunity cost might be constant and it might be not. That's another narrative. So if you're analyzing that narrative, then you need to first analyze the fact that how PPC shows opportunity cost through diagrams and examples. Also, remember that you don't need to just make the diagram. You need to explain the diagram as well. The diagram shouldn't appear to the examiner that there's a diagram that is drawn that has no meaning to it, right? The diagram shouldn't appear lost. The diagram should be well connected to the above and the below paragraphs. Okay, and then the second narrative the question talks about is that whether opportunity cost is likely to remain constant if resources are reallocated. So there is a possibility that opportunity cost could be constant. But so when you're analyzing this narrative that yes, opportunity cost could be constant, you need to make an assumption here that there could be perfect mobility of factors of production and perfect substitutability between the factors of production involved in agriculture sector and the industrial sector with a linear downward sloping straight line. In that case, the opportunity cost could be constant. I have drawn, you can see my PPC constant opportunity cost videos in my AS micro playlist. So in that case, but you make an assumption here that, this, but then when you're evaluating this argument, remember that 2 marks are for evaluation. So when you're evaluating the narrative that whether it will always be constant, obviously, no, it will not always be constant, because you could argue, because now you will argue on the narrative. Here, the narrative is in argument form. I mean, here the evaluation of the narrative is in the argumentative form, that you argue on the narrative that no, it will not be constant. Why? Because obviously the factors of production will never be perfect substitutes for because agriculture and industrial sectors are two different sectors with two different factors of production, with two different skills and experience of the labor and capital and the type and the nature of machinery and the factors of production it involves. They are two different, and they are never perfect substitutes. They are imperfect substitutes. So there would always be factor immobility when you are switching from agriculture sector to industrial, when you are reallocating your FOP from agriculture to industrial. So in that case, the PPC will be concave to the origin. It will be increasing opportunity cost. So consider whether opportunity cost is likely to remain constant. No, it will. It might not. It is not possible to remain constant because of these and these reasons. But you need to explain why. You need to draw that increasing PPC diagram and then tell why. The opportunity cost is more likely to increase in the near future if more resources are allocated from agriculture to industry. And what are the reasons for it? That is already covered in my video on increasing opportunity cost. You need to mention those reasons. And then followed by a judgment. And then you need to sort of provide a judgment, which will be a conclusion in the judgment form in the end. Right? So you guys, a lot of students struggle in essays because you need to understand the nature of the. First of all, guys, it is very important that as economic students, you understand the nature of what the subject is. The nature of the subject, I mean, the topics are easy, but the kind of questions that come in the past papers are quite critical thinking based. You need to understand that. They're testing your critical thinking skills. And unless and until you develop those skills, you develop that writing sense, you develop that writing, thinking, and that sense and that taste for the subject. Unless and until you don't have that taste for the subject, you will never be able to excel it. You need to develop that sense and taste for the subject, right? So again, so moving forward, again, there's another question which says, like, so first of all, I'm not solving past papers here. I'm just telling you what sort of a pattern the examiner is following. And my next video will be based on detailed analysis on the assessment objectives. So again, the question 3 is saying, with the help of formula, explain what PES is and consider which factors are most important for a good that is likely to be relatively elastic or inelastic. So for a question like this, the fact that they're asking us to explain the meaning of the price elasticity of the supply and then talk about the factors and then tell which factors are most important in determining whether the product is elastic or inelastic in supply. So knowledge and understanding would involve you define PES, you define the formula, explain the formula, the formula is the coefficient greater than 1, less than 1, equals to 1, unitary and all of that, and then tell a bit about what the factors are. And the analysis portion would involve a detailed, in-depth explanation of the factors affecting PES. How could those factors make the supply inelastic, relatively elastic, perfectly inelastic, or relatively inelastic, what those factors are. That's what analysis is. Now, a lot of students will think that the fact that it says and consider which factors are most important in determining whether it is relatively elastic or inelastic. So don't think that the part where it says and consider whether the factors are most important in determining always, if it's not always that, remember, it is not always. Again, I'm emphasizing, it is not always that if the question is coming in the form of and consider which factors are most important, so whatever is after and consider will always be evaluation. It's not that. It depends upon the nature of the question here. The nature of the question here is you need to identify the narrative. What is the narrative here? The narrative is simply that they're asking about factors of production. They're asking about factors affecting elasticity, and then out of those factors, which are the most important? That is a narrative. So analyze the narrative, which means analyze the factors affecting elasticity in supply, and then the part and then the part which says which is most important. So the fact that when they're asking us which is most important, they're asking us to talk about the relative importance. Here you are evaluating those factors, because evaluation also involves, remember that evaluation also involves talking about the relative importance of economic theory. So for example, let's say that government intervention involves many things. Indirect taxes is one way, price controls is one way, subsidies is one way, information provision is one way. So whether information provision is more important, or whether subsidies are more important in increasing the production and consumption of merit goods. So which is the fact which says that which is more important means that you're placing an argument, or the relative argument, that which holds more importance, and that is again evaluating the narrative. The narrative is here. The narrative for government intervention is that, I mean, both are ways to improve the allocation of the prior misallocation of, basically correcting market failure or the prior misallocation of merit goods. So analyzing the narrative would be that you explain what, I mean, analyzing the narrative would be you sort of take a deep dive into explaining it through diagrams how information provision would solve this problem, how subsidies would solve this problem, and then you sort of evaluate which would be more relevant. Now, obviously, if you're evaluating which would be more relevant, you need to talk about the disadvantages as well for subsidies and information provision, because automatically those disadvantages will fall in. Now, again, like I said, there's no fixed rule for it. To understand what evaluation is, you need to develop the sense and the taste for an understanding economic sense. If you have learned things by heart without rote learned it, just read the note, just rote learned it, without having that critical thinking ability and skill in you, then there are more likely chances that you will not be able to perform well. More likely chances you will not be able to perform well. So you need to have that critical thinking skills in you as well. Again, assess the likely success of two government policies to make the price elastic supply of agriculture goods more elastic. Now, obviously, here the narrative is that they're asking you what are the the narrative is that there must be government policies to make this price elastic supply in agricultural products more elastic, right? There has to be some government policies. We're not talking about what they are, but the narrative is that there are policies, right? So analysis would involve analyzing those policies, analyzing the narrative, right? While evaluation would involve evaluating the narrative, evaluating that out of those policies, what are the chances that maybe two of them, if you're evaluating two of those policies, that how successful would they be? How successful? To what extent would they be successful? The fact that how successful could something be, to what extent could something be, involves evaluating that with a critical thinking ability, where you talk about the disadvantages and the relative importance and the relative disadvantages between the two, or the relative disadvantage or the disadvantages of the two, depending upon the nature of the question. One more thing that candidates also need to be aware of is, so guys, I know there's a lot of confusion regarding what the assessment objectives are, and you need to hang on and give me time for my next video, because that will be super detailed video on what the assessment objectives are. And if you are really excited for that, I would definitely want you guys to comment on this video that yes, you are excited for that video, so that I can, because I read all the comments, by the way. So the candidates must be aware that question here is saying, for example, if I talk about what the question here is saying, it talks about which factor is most important, right? As in, I'm talking about question 3 here, that which factor is most important in determining the PS, which means that the exam requires evaluation here, but is not limited to evaluation only. As in, they're asking you to evaluate here, but it is not only there. The question is not limited to only evaluation. Just because it says and consider whether which factor is most important, students might think that it's only evaluation here. But I said no, there's analysis as well. Analysis about the factors affecting elasticity, basically analyzing the factors affecting elasticity, explaining them in detail, that what factors are affecting elasticity. That is part of analysis. And then evaluating those factors, which is more important. Here, the student is also required to explain what the factors affecting PES is. And then, and the fact that you talk about the meaning and the formulas, that would be assessment objective 1. So remember that it's very important for the student to comprehend the wording of the question, break the question down, read it maybe in your own language, your own mother language, your own national language, try to read that and interpret in that language, break down the question into 2 parts so that it becomes easier for you. And like I said, the student needs to comprehend the wording of the question very carefully so that the student may know what constitutes analysis. So in order to first understand what is constituting analysis, you need to break down the question and what part of the question is constituting analysis and what constitutes evaluation. But the more important part is to know what comes under evaluation, what constitutes analysis. For this, you need to hang on till my next video. So, and again, like I said, for example, if you now move on to the Feb March part, it talks about the function of the price, explain the function of the price and resource allocation, and consider the importance of these functions in relation to the potential effectiveness of a market economy. So again, you talk about the functions. I mean, the fact that you need to talk about the 4 functions of the price mechanism, and then you know, how do they apply in the case of a market economy is all about analysis. And then fact that, and consider the importance of these functions, as in how important they are in as far as the potential effectiveness is concerned. This is basically your evaluation, that how important, to what extent are they important, are they or are they not. Obviously they are, and to an extent they are not that effective in allocating resources efficiently, because the objective of the price mechanism is to allocate resources efficiently. That's what Adam Smith said. No need for the government intervening. The price mechanism auto heals and auto corrects all sorts of inefficiencies. So the fact that market failure exists and the fact that yes, there is still misallocation is a possible question mark on the effectiveness of the price mechanism. So I'm not solving this question, so I won't go into what you need to write in this. And then the next question assesses whether all market economies should be mixed economies. So the analysis would be, you talk about why should all market economies be mixed economies. That is what analysis should be here. You talk about, in knowledge and understanding, you talk about economic systems, you talk about what market and mixed economies are, and then why should market economies become mixed economies, as in what are the reasons. So what are the disadvantages that market economies has that is not in mixed economic systems, right? You talk about that, and that would be part of analysis, right? But part of evaluation would be that you sort of give a counter narrative to, because here the narrative is that the market economy should become mixed economy. That is what the narrative is. So analyzing the narrative would be that you say, yes, they should, but why should they? That's part of analysis. And then the fact that no, they shouldn't, that's a counter narrative to your analysis. So you talk about why shouldn't they, and you give all the reasons for that, right? So that is what evaluation is, and then it should be followed by a judgment. Okay. Remember that one thing which you guys need to remember is that there is no one fixed correct conclusion judgment in the form of a judgment in economics that fits for all. There will never be one fixed judgment or one fixed conclusion that is fit for all. Remember that whenever economic theory has 2 perspectives, there are always opposing judgments involved. So whether the question says discuss whether protectionism should be applied on by the domestic economy. So yes, maybe one student says yes, it should, or maybe one student says no, it shouldn't, or maybe one student takes a generalized approach. He talks about why it should, but then why it shouldn't. But if you're saying why it should, then you should provide logical evidence. And remember that according to what the logical evidence that you have provided, that it should, then according to that evidence, it should actually be it should. It's not according to what you think it should. It should all appear that it should always. I mean, it should also appear that it should, right? So maybe protectionism shouldn't. So for example, maybe I could argue in the exam, in my judgment, I could argue that maybe protectionism might not be effective for a developing country that is relying on international trade, because especially if it is thinking on applying protectionism on developed nations or its major trading partners, let's say, who that developing country is accused of dumping, because proving dumping to the WHO is very difficult. And what if the threat of retaliatory protectionism, retaliatory tariffs if they impose tariffs as well? So that threat or that potential threat could be huge, and it could be massive, culminating into a price war, which could be damaging for both countries and more damaging to the poor country. So that could be one supportive reason that maybe protectionism should not be allowed right now. Maybe it could be allowed later on, but not right now. So that is also an acceptable conclusion or a judgment that you have formed. Remember that the logical and valid reasoning, it should make sense to the examiner. It should make sense to the examiner. And in my future videos, I have probably 4 or 5 days Today is the 30th of April. I am making the video. I don't know whether I will be able to post it on the 30th. Maybe I post it on the 1st of May. That is tomorrow. But I would still have a margin of 2-3 more days. And I would also make a video on the marking criteria as well, as in what sort of things the examiner is looking for when they're marking an answer. And the Feb-March question on section C, macro talked about explain the circular flow and consider the extent to which these circular flow changes become an open economy. So talking about what the circular flow is providing them with knowledge and understanding is basically on the circular flow. Explaining what the circular flow is basically part of the assessment objective 1, while you talk about, but you need to identify the narrative here. The narrative here is what the circular, the narrative here is, number one, what the circular flow is, and then the narrative is that when the circular flow of income changes, basically, that's the narrative, that circular flow changes if the economy becomes an open economy. So we know, so that is the narrative. So analyzing the narrative would be that, yes, you tell why does it changes. So it's, remember that the main first part is, what is the narrative? What is the question asking us? Simply, you guys listen. Narrative simply, what is the question asking us? So basically, the narrative here is that how circular flow changes, how would it change if the economy becomes an open economy? So definitely it will change. So analyzing that part, that how would it change, is your analysis, while counter arguing it that maybe, those changes in the circular flow depends upon these and these factors, or maybe it might not change even after you become an open economy. If you have a reason for that, then that is also part of evaluation, followed by a conclusion. Assess whether consequences are always positive. Analysis would be what is the narrative? The narrative is economic growth is always positive, right? Which means that yes, there it is positive, and then it is not positive. So the knowledge and understanding part, where you'll get maximum 4 marks, would be that you talk about what the economic growth is. You provide them with, you provide a good introduction to what the economic growth is. Also remember that introductions does not always mean that you define the topic. Yes, you could do that, but maybe I would introduce a topic by saying, I'm not saying you do that, but I would do that. I would say that, economic growth is one of the core macroeconomic indicators that policymakers are, always concerned about. So, and then economic growth is defined as, I would say like that. So, so whether it is positive, yes, it is positive. That is analysis. You say that, okay, fine, economic growth is positive. And when is it positive? That is analysis. But counter arguing when it is not positive. And again, listen. So the fact that it is not always positive, because yes, there are certain limitations to it. Because yes, there are, economic growth has disadvantages as well. So whether it is always positive or not always positive depends upon a lot of factors. So the part where you say that economic growth is positive, that's analysis. The part where you say that economic growth is negative, that's also analysis. Because economic growth has both the things. But then the fact that economic growth, what factors, on what scale will we measure whether economic growth is positive or negative? As in, when should we consider economic growth as positive, or when should we consider it is negative? That the fact that whether economic growth right now has been of, let's say, 10%, and this is showing a positive sign, or right now that 10% growth is showing us a negative sign, because that 10% growth for country A has been a good thing, but the 10% growth for country B has been an undesirable thing, because it has led to severe levels of income inequality, worsening that problem. So it would depend upon these and these and these and these factors. So the fact that you talk about it depends upon this and this and this, and then you end up with a final judgment, is basically evaluation, right? You could also argue that a part of the fact that you say that, economic growth is not always positive. If you're mentioning the negative consequences of economic growth in a certain way, that you're saying that economic growth is not always positive, a part of that could also come under the umbrella of evaluation. I think that it could come under the umbrella of evaluation, but the marking scheme has not provided that under the umbrella of evaluation, but I would provide it under the umbrella of evaluation as well. But that is not the problem here. That is not the debate here. Whether this will be part of analysis or an evaluation, that is not the debate that we're making over here. That is irrelevant for us. Whether it is evaluation or analysis, we have to mention it in the exam. Irrespective of whether you would consider that as analysis or evaluation, the disadvantage of economic growth has to be mentioned over here. But if you're just mentioning the disadvantages, you're like, okay, you know what, economic growth has disadvantages. Then if you're just mentioning the disadvantages, then it would form analysis. But if you're mentioning disadvantages in a certain writing style where you counter argue the advantages by saying that, you know what, okay, fine, economic growth has a lot of benefits, but then the fact that economic growth results into inequality of income, or economic growth might, even if it's beneficial, but then the fact that economic growth could be unsustainable because it's inflationary in nature or causes negative externalities, which is undesirable for an economy. Now this sort of a writing style is quite different, because here you are objectifying, you are posing an objection on the positivity of economic growth, or counter arguing that narrative. Now this becomes evaluation then. So evaluation is more of the writing sense as well, or writing style as well. And so one part of the evaluation could also be that, you know, how beneficial is basically economic growth depends upon whether it is short term or it is long term, or to what extent it is sustainable, you know, to what extent are the benefits, equally shared among the population, because that is very important. Because if it's not equally shared among the population and more of the economic growth is coming from one dominant sector in the economy, it will be considered as imbalanced economic growth, and it will also, if it's not equally shared, then it will also result into income inequalities as well. Guys, remember that when you're analyzing the narrative, then the evaluation is linked, or it is derived from the analysis. Because whatever you're writing in the analysis, you will derive the evaluation out of it. So all of it is connected. You need to understand that. And unless or until you really know what these assessment objectives are, you will never be able to attempt a question. So a lot of students are always crying that they're writing good answers, but they think they're writing good answers, but they're never getting good marks in the exam. Because they think that they write a lot. But it's not about you writing a lot. It's about you writing relevant information to fulfill or satisfy all the assessment objectives. So in analysis, if you're writing that like I said, the negative consequences of economic growth could form part of analysis, and one way of, if you're just saying that the disadvantages of economic growth are as follows, or the negative consequences are as follows, that would be analysis. But if your writing style is such that you're saying that although yes, economic growth is beneficial, but then the fact that economic growth results into inequality of income is counter arguing the narrative, and that becomes part of evaluation then, right? And then the fact that you're saying that, okay, fine, it results into income inequality, but how beneficial it is, because the question is asking us whether it will always be positive or not. So whether it will be positive or not depends upon. So the fact that it says it depends upon is another way to evaluate. Okay. So believe me, it's not really technical. It's not confusing. It's quite simple. It's just that you need to develop critical thinking skills while you are writing, and you will, in order to score well in economics. Honestly speaking, I am very much. I put my foot down and I'm saying this, that you need to have in-depth content. You need to read a lot. Read from the internet, read from books. Unless and until you don't have in-depth content, you will never be able to answer a question well. And then the fact that whether, appreciation of an exchange rate, explain what is meant by appreciation and consider whether a country will benefit from that appreciation. Then, you provide knowledge on appreciation. You make a diagram for that. When does a currency appreciates? So that all involves providing knowledge. Now, if you haven't done that, if you haven't successfully, and consider whether the country can benefit. So if you have mentioned all the benefits, but you haven't really provided. So for example, you start off by answer by defining what appreciation is, and then you quickly jump on to the benefits of appreciation. Now, again, you haven't really fulfilled assessment objective 1 4 marks. So maybe the examiner would give you only 1 mark for definition, right? Because you haven't really, the knowledge of the topic itself or the knowledge of that narrative is important, right? What is the subject matter of the question? It's appreciation. To provide the examiner with sufficient knowledge, right? What is knowledge? Also remember that 4 marks does not mean 4 points. 3 marks does not mean 3 points. 2 marks does not mean 2 points. There is no guidelines or no evidence by Cambridge to prove that a 3 mark given in a question means you have to write 3 points, or 4 marks mean 4 points. Remember And so how many points should we write? Because this is something that is very difficult for me to answer. No one knows how much you are supposed to write. You write as much as you can based on the existing time that you have. Your answer should reflect your best judgment or the most rational judgment based on whatever knowledge you have and the existing time you have, because you need to complete other points as well. But the fact that only 3 points need to be written or 4 points need to be written, that's not the case. Because answers are a normative assessment. They are a judgment based on the qualitative assessment, holds more weightage on the quantitative assessment. Remember that. The quality of the answer has more weightage. It depends upon how well you have written, or what is the overall feeling or the vibe of the examiner when he has read your answer. Does he feels that you have fulfilled all the assessment objectives or not? Okay guys, so now I hope you understood this video. If you have, then do comment, do give me feedback, and if you want more videos like this, do give me feedback as well. Share my channel to others so that others may benefit as well. I'll see you all around in the next video where we will cover the assessment objectives. Until then, take care.